Now, the Greek of the week. So my podcast was in Hebrews 5 this week. And so I thought I'd do this interesting, very interesting verse from Hebrews 5:6 today. So, hos entais hemerais tes sarkos autou de ases te kai hikaterias. Hikaterias. All right. So, who in the days of the flesh of him. Interesting. Hebrews has a dualism in it of sorts. I don't see how anyone can deny that between spirit and between the created realm and so forth. The trick is, of course, in specifying exactly what that dualism is. But this is interesting because there's an implicit contrast, it seems obvious to me, between the days of Jesus' flesh, which was while he was on earth, and his days now, which I think in general Hebrews would suggest are days of spirit. That may not be pleasing to systematic theologians. I sometimes have said, my job is to interpret the Bible and then let the theologians, iron out all the problems. It's a bit of a joke, but I'm not entirely joking. I do theology too, so I can be the one trying to solve the problems myself. But anyway, not that this is a huge problem. It's kind of what I grew up with. I kind of grew up with you die and then your spirit goes to heaven. That's not exactly what Christians have historically believed. But you can see where there are verses like this that could play into that kind of a conception. Well, enough of that. Who in the days of the flesh of him, both prayers and supplications, both prayers and petitions. I used petitions instead of supplications. I used a plus instead of and to get it on the line. Te is a post-positive. It's always late to the game. So I'm going to translate it before both prayers and petitions rather than after petitions and. The and something is typically a both and construction. All right, there we have line one. Now I'm going to move my picture up to the top. I don't know how exactly that shows up in the video, but now my face is in the right place. All right, so he offered both, who in the days of his flesh, both petitions and prayers, pros ton dunamenon, sodzane auton ek thanatu meta krauges. He both prayers and petitions to the one being able to save him out of death. All right, so dunamenon, anyway, dunamenon is men are passive participles, okay? Not when men is at the very end, but when men is almost to the end. Men is a sign of a middle or a passive. I have a friend who says middlemen. That might be more accurate, but men are passive is memorable. Anyway, mnemonics are about remembering, not about accuracy or anyway. So this is dunamai. Amai, it's deponent. So even though it has a middle or passive ending, it is an active meaning. Not sure how you would make being able into a passive. But to the one, it has the article on it, so it's an articular participle. It's a adjectival participle. And so it's who's it telling us about? If it's an adjectival participle, who's it telling us about? Well, it's telling us about the one. We have to come up with one. It's substantive because the noun it goes with isn't there. It's talking about God the Father, of course. God the Father is the one able to save Jesus out of death. And we remember that in the book of Acts, the regular wording is God raised him from the dead. Usually in the New Testament, Jesus is passive in the resurrection. Action is being done on him by God the Father. So to the one being able to save him out of death. Oh, I played my cards, haven't I? I don't think this is Jesus in the garden saying, save me from death. Let this cup pass from me. Because the next line talks about how God answered the prayer. Well, God didn't answer the prayer of rescuing him from the cross. God saved him out of death in the resurrection. That prayer was answered. So I think we know too much, as it were. We know about the Garden of Gethsemane, and we kind of have a tendency to infect this verse with the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, I'm not saying it couldn't refer to the Garden of Gethsemane, but anyway, none of the Gospels were probably written yet, or maybe only Mark when Hebrews was written in my dating. All right, so to the one being able, this is a present middle or passive deponent participle, accusative masculine singular from dunamai. All right, to save, sozo, this is a present stem, ain is a present, and often on a present infinitive. So this is a present active infinitive from sozo. The one being able to be saving him out of death. And these prayers and petitions with crying, iskuros, with strong crying, with loud crying, kai dakruon, and tears, pros enenkas, having offered. All right, Greek sometimes will put the participle at the end, with loud crying and tears, having offered them. So now we know what he's doing with these prayers and petitions. Who in the days of his flesh, having offered, way down here, both prayers and petitions to the one being able to save him out of death with loud crying and tears. Okay, so pros enenkas is enenka, I've just memorized as the second aorist of pharaoh. So this is from prosphero, which means to offer. It's the sacrifice word. Now, this is going to be difficult, but normally it's difficult even when it's regular. Sos is what it normally is, and the sigma alpha would indicate that it's an aorist active participle, nominative masculine singular, in this case from prosphero. Enenka has me thinking aorist, so it doesn't do the sigma. It's irregular. It's a second aorist. So this is also, it is indeed aorist active participle, nominative masculine singular from prosphero. It's Jesus is the one having offered. The having comes from the fact, and I should have spaced this out a little. Give me a second. There, now it's spaced out. Having offered them kai asakustes, and having been heard. So theta epsilon has me thinking aorist passive. This is indeed a nominative masculine singular participle ending. It's just, you have to memorize it. I inherited a long song that has all the nominative singular participle endings. Luthes, thesa, then, len. Anyway, luthes is aorist passive participle, nominative masculine singular. And having been heard, the been comes from the passive, the having comes from the aorist. Asakuo. So if he's talking about, Lord, let this cup pass from me, that prayer wasn't heard. And so I go with the idea that this is a prayer to save out of death, a prayer of resurrection, which he could have offered from the grave, he descended to the dead, could have offered it then. Doesn't say when, although it does say from the days of his flesh. So nix that. It had to be while he was still on earth. All right, so having offered and having been heard from the godliness, from his reverent fear, from his eulabeia, apo tes eulabeios. All right, so this is Jesus offering prayers and petitions as he is facing death, that the Lord would save him out of death, offering it with strong crying and tears, and having been heard because of him being without sin, I suppose is the idea. Well, Hebrews 5:6 in Greek,